Hey everyone, for those of you that don't know me, my name is David, and my wife and I are full-time RVers that live and travel the United States in our Springdale travel trailer behind me. And for those of you that do follow us, you know that recently we upgraded to these 30-pound propane tanks from the 20-pound propane tanks that originally came with our travel trailer. And in this video, I'm gonna talk to you guys about why maybe you should think about upgrading to 30-pound or even 40-pound propane tanks in your trailer or RV. Now, the main reason we upgraded to these 30-pound propane tanks up from 20-pounders is that occasionally we would run out of propane while staying at a site, and we just wanted that to no longer happen. We usually fill our propane tanks when we're traveling between sites so that we don't have to make a special trip while on site. So if we run out of propane, or we are about to run out of propane on site, that's an extra trip for us, and it takes up our time, and it also burns some diesel fuel on our truck driving out to get these tanks refilled. But if we're traveling already between sites, it's not that big of a deal. Now, we usually stay at a site for about 2 weeks, and during the warmer months, our 20-pound propane tanks would easily last 2 weeks because, we're only using propane for our furnaces and our refrigerator when it is running on propane. And off of one 20-pound propane tank, we could last about 1.5 weeks. So with two 20-pounders, that would give us about 3 weeks. However, in the colder months where we also have to run our furnace, we use a lot more propane. And if we're running our furnace every day and at night as well, then our 20-pound propane tanks would only last about 6 days. So that is 12 days between propane tanks, or between two 20-pound propane tanks, sorry. And so that would not get us the full 2 weeks. So now that we've upgraded to these 30-pounders, it's basically like adding another 20-pound propane tank. So we get 50% more propane, and therefore it lasts 50% longer. So off of these two 30-pounders during the warm months, we can last for about 4.5 weeks before needing to refill on propane. And then during the colder ones, where we're also running our furnace all the time, we can get about 18 days out of these two 30-pounders. Now, there is another option though, and that is 40-pound propane tanks. So you might be thinking, hey man, if you want your propane to be able to last as long as possible, then why didn't you go with the 40-pounders? And there are a couple of considerations in mind that kept us from going with the 40-pounders, because yes, we absolutely could have fit two 40-pounders up here and everything would have been just fine. But it is cost of the tanks themselves, and then an even more important factor for us was the weight of those tanks.
We're moving this section inside because it's cold outside, and while David is perfectly fine with filming outside and he can deal with the cold and it doesn't bug him as much as it bugs me, I much prefer to talk to the camera when I'm warm, and it's really nice and warm in here. So we're going to talk about the price difference between 30-pound propane tanks and 40-pound propane tanks, and it's one of the big reasons why we went with 30-pounders, and it's because on Amazon you can buy a 30-pound propane tank for $60 a piece. The 40-pound propane tanks, though, are $110 a piece, and some of you may argue that buying two 40-pound propane tanks would make it so that we could stay out even longer without having to go and fill our propane, and you're right. But we already don't have to fill our propane typically while we're camping. We save it for when we're moving from campsite to campsite, when we already have to stop somewhere where there's probably going to be propane fill. And so getting the 40-pound propane tanks isn't really going to extend that any. We're still probably going to end up filling those up every 2 weeks. So for us, that almost double price per propane tank just wasn't worth it. But we also have a pretty small RV. We only cook for the two of us, and if you have a larger family or if you have a larger fifth wheel or a travel trailer, then you're probably going to be using quite a bit more propane. Or let's say that you're staying at an RV park for a month or 2 months or a whole season or however long you want to stay at an RV park, then getting those much larger 40-pound propane tanks might actually be a benefit to you. Because then in your case, you would actually benefit from having a larger propane tank. You wouldn't have to drive into town, especially if you're staying somewhere for a long time, or you're staying somewhere cold for a long time, and then you don't have to, take your propane tanks off, unhook them, drag them into town, and fill them up as often as you would with 30-pounders. If you want to check out the price difference for yourself, we went ahead and posted links down in the description below to the 30-pound propane tank, the 40-pound propane tank, as well as those plastic slip-on covers that go over the propane tanks for travel trailers.
Another really important consideration you're going to want to make before you upgrade to 30-pounders or even 40-pound propane tanks is that they're going to be adding weight to your rig, and you need to be sure that your RV is going to be capable of that added weight. This is especially important for travel trailers because typically the propane tanks are right near the tongue of the trailer. So basically all of that extra weight is going to be converted directly into tongue weight. 20-pound propane tanks weigh about 37 pounds completely full. 30-pound propane tanks weigh about 55 pounds when completely full. And 40-pound propane tanks weigh 75 pounds each when completely full. So if you go ahead and slap on 40-pound propane tanks onto the front of your travel trailer, you're going to be adding about 75 pounds of tongue weight if you have 2 propane tanks, which, that might put you over the edge. And in our situation, it wouldn't have put us over the edge, but it would have gotten us a lot closer to our maximum allowable tongue weight. And I like to have a little bit of factor of safety when it comes to ratings like that. So that's another reason we went with the 30-pounders. Because like Rose said, we didn't really need that gargantuan storage that the 40-pounders gave us. So by going with the 30-pounders, we were able to, stay further away from that maximum tongue weight rating just for some extra factor of safety.
One major problem you might run into when you upgrade from a 20-pound propane tank to anything larger than that is you now no longer have the ability to exchange those at a location. And David and I have been to some places where the only place in town, because it's such a small town, to get propane is at an exchange location. There's nowhere to fill your propane up within like 20 miles. So we have run into that issue, but that was when we had 20-pound propane tanks, so we could exchange them. There are some downsides to exchanging propane tanks though. If you have one that you take in and it is completely empty and you exchange it for a new one, that new one, they typically don't fill them up past 75% of the way full. Also, that exchange pricing is a lot more expensive than if you had just taken your tank in to get it filled somewhere. So, not only are you paying more money now, you're also getting less propane. But when you upgrade to a larger propane tank like a 30-pound or 40-pounder, you have to get those filled. You can't exchange those anywhere. And we have been in situations, like I said, where we had nowhere to fill them. Luckily though, with our 30-pound propane tanks, we haven't run into that issue yet, but we've only had them for about 9 months now. And while it was an issue one time in our 3 years on the road so far, I don't expect it to be such a big issue in the future because we're not typically completely out of propane when we go in to fill up. So if we can't find a place to fill, then it's not really that big of a deal. And if you're having 40-pounders, then it might be even less of a deal. Here are some tips on places where you can fill your propane at. And I'm only going to list 2 because they're the 2 that we've used. We haven't really used other ones besides that, unlike gas stations or something like that. And that is Tractor Supply and U-Haul locations. The U-Haul locations are almost consistent with having someone available that can fill your propane for you. Tractor Supply, on the other hand, while is much cheaper than U-Haul typically, it's really hit or miss. We have been in situations where we have called to make sure, because we've experienced this a lot, make sure that there's someone there to fill our propane for us. They say yes. We have gone in less than 30 minutes later to get those tanks filled, and that person is now no longer available. That, or one thing that happened when we were near Camp Verde, Arizona, is there was a storm coming, but we were completely out of propane. So I took it in to get filled. But knowing from experience, I called Tractor Supply and I said, do you have someone there that can fill our tanks? And they said, yes, no problem. So I get there less than 10 minutes after I called them because I knew there was a storm coming. And I get there and they tell me, sorry, you're gonna have to wait a couple hours because there's a storm nearby and we don't fill propane tanks when there's a thunderstorm nearby. Why they didn't tell me that on the phone, I don't know. So if you want to be able to fill your propane tank somewhere, those are two places that are pretty good. They're kind of all over the country, so you're not gonna have too many issues finding a place like that, but Tractor Supply is super hit or miss on whether they have someone there to fill your tanks for you.
Now, of course, those aren't the only two places that you can get your propane filled. Those are just two that we use routinely. U-Haul usually has great prices. There's always someone there to get the to fill your propane, but Tractor Supply, like Rose said, hands down the best prices, but be sure to call. And if you guys have, places that you routinely go to that have really good propane prices that are all over the country, please let us know in the comments below to help everyone else out, because if they're going to be upgrading their propane tanks, no more exchanges for you. You got to fill your propane every time. But again, you always should be filling your propane and never exchanging unless absolutely necessary for the reasons that Ro mentioned. Now, hopefully this video is helpful for you guys. If you're looking to upgrade your tanks, I highly recommend it. There's no reason to still be rolling around with those little 20-pounders. Well, I guess...
Unless you're not full-time.
If you're not full-time, if you're only going out for a couple days, sure. But if you're going to be staying on location for a week or so at a time, if you're a full-time RVer, especially if you're a full-time RVer, get rid of those 20-pound propane tanks. Upgrade to 30 or 40 if you've got the money and you've got the extra tongue weight.
It took us way too long to make that upgrade.
I know, yeah.
Seriously.
For real, we just upgraded after about 3 years on the road. But that is all for this video. I hope it was helpful for you guys, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Sweet Pea.
You say bye. She knows it now.
I know, we don't even have to tell her. We just have to say goodbye.